Man to Men is for men like you and me. My name is Chris Godfrey, and I serve as a board member of Beiduf Slankai. We are in our year-end giving months and asking for your financial support. Your gift empowers the next 40 years of men leading families, strengthening churches, and impacting our communities for Christ. Further this vision at byx.org/give. Thank you for your investment, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
This is Man to Men, the premier audio journal for men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove with you for another in-depth conversation with a courageous leader, and today we've got Eddie Williams. He's the lead pastor of Doxa Church near Seattle, Washington, a veteran NFL fullback, and host of the Ex Nihilo podcast. Eddie Williams, welcome to the show.
Honored, man. This is going to be really exciting. I think this is a really valuable conversation around Christianity, health, faith, and the sort of combination of all those things. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, I have been too, man. Again, we got connected through a mutual friend, mutual pastor that we're friends with. And you're a man and a leader who's been speaking a lot, particularly to men's health and wellness, how that is an important issue in our walk with God. We're going to get into some of that today. But first, Eddie, I wonder if you'd share with some of the guys your own journey with Jesus Christ, how he formed your path, informed your pro football career, and how that led you into the pastorate. It doesn't have to be the short version, man.
Of course, yeah. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Wasn't a Christian. You know, most people aren't there, I've come to find. And parents grew up. They grew up, I should say. I grew up underneath them. They were both never married, separated at age 9. Decided to bounce around the Bay Area along with me and my sister in tow. We were moving around, Section 8 housing, grew up very poor, no Christian background, nothing like that. Ended up losing my mother at a young age. She passed away of cancer at 13. My dad left our family, started a new family, and kind of left us in no man's land. We ended up bouncing around different homes. Finally found a home with a distant family member back in the peninsula of the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. And things kind of ironed themselves out. Very turbulent childhood. But again, no God, no Christianity influence at all. Was able to sort of straighten my life out, got a college scholarship to go play football at the University of Idaho. And I took the first chance I got to just kind of get as far away from the Bay Area as I could, even though I loved it. Ended up in northern Idaho, which isn't exactly, it does feel a lot like
that's
exile.
Not the Bay Area. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so we end up there, and crazy story. We're getting on the bus to go back and play San Jose State, a football team out in the Bay Area, and guys handing out Bibles, getting on the bus. And I'm a freshman here, and I feel pity for the guy because nobody's taken any of his Bibles. So I feel bad for him. I'm one of the last guys on the bus. I go, sure, man, I'll take your book. Like, what do you want me to do with this thing?
Yeah.
And he goes, oh man, you're going to love this book. It's the greatest book ever written. Start with the Gospel of John. All the other Gospels, they're going to tell you what Christ did. Gospel of John's going to tell you who Christ was. And, at 18, 19 years old, I thought, ooh, that's, kind of profound. So he actually takes the paper Bible back. He gives me his Bible. It's a King James version. He was a Catholic guy. And he gave me the King James version. It's nice leather Bible. You take this one, read this. And so after the trip, I went back to my apartment and I read the book of John, and I kept going because I didn't know what to do because no one told me how to read the Bible. So I read the book of Acts, and I was like, this is a sequel. This is part 2. It's like The Godfather 2. It's like, it's just as good. So I'm still reading that, and I keep going because I don't know. And Romans shows up, and I read Romans 1.
Romans in the King James.
In the King James.
Yeah.
I didn't know any other way, Jared. I just thought this is what Christians did. They talk in weird language. And I read the whole part. You've exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and you worship created things rather than the creator, God, who is forever blessed. And I read this, and I'm like, that's me. So up until that point, important context is I was an arrogant, secular, very skilled at school, football, sports, no girlfriends, no alcohol. I would just call myself like a secular Pharisee. I was really good at judging other people. I had suffered so much at a young age, I thought no one could tell me anything. And so when he said, hey, you could read the Bible, he challenged me in that way. And I thought, okay, 72 hours, I'll have this thing nailed. Just let me. And I come across this part and I realize, oh, it's not that simple. There's something different. There's a sin nature. There's a condition in me that cannot be changed apart from God. And realizing that as a young kid, obviously maybe not in this sort of language, but I realized it, in my mind, the similar way. Okay, I need something beyond me. And so from then it was a radical transformation. It was weird. It was, I want to know more. I want to know why I'm flawed, what sin is, who Jesus is, Bible studies, bookstores. I was racking up credit card debt because of books and commentaries and concordances. Oh, wow. And this is like, that was robbing Peter to pay Paul sort of, but I still did it. It was like, looking back, it was worth it. And I met my girlfriend at the time, who was now my wife, Sarah, and she was a pastor's daughter. And we met and we grew together. She was also an athlete. And, I invited her along on the journey. And, about a year later, we were sitting in a church in Moscow, Idaho. And it's not the Moscow, Idaho, that church that you're thinking, that's really famous now there.
Yeah.
Not by any stretch. In fact, the exact opposite. In fact, I think they actually have taken over a building there now, but they started a series on Mother Earth. And I didn't know anything, I'm listening to this. I'm going, this can't be right. And so I'm flipping through my Bible, like Mother Mary, I'm like, where's Mother Earth? I'm just like, I don't get it. And then that's where I feel like what I would now say is the Holy Spirit speaking to me saying, hey, this isn't the way the church is supposed to be. And I want you to do something about it. And so here I am, 20 years old, feeling like, okay, God's asking me to be a pastor. And I'm leaning over to my girlfriend who's, was raised by a pastor saying, I think I'm going to be a pastor, and I'm wearing sweatpants in the church building. And she's like, what are you talking? You're not a pastor. Pastors are white dudes, comb over, 58 years old. You are not a pastor. And so I had a lot of convincing to do, but eventually, and the rest is sort of history, man. That sparked my journey towards becoming a pastor and brought that to me through the NFL and beyond, and got right into ministry once football was over.
Yeah. What was it like being a man of faith in the NFL?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think in college it was much more difficult. I think, one, guys are just far more immature. This is maybe my experience and not others, who knows, but far more immature. There's just less opportunity to practice your faith. I think in the NFL, surprising enough, as bad of a rap as it gets, there are lots of good, godly men in the NFL. And I got to play for multiple teams and see it in different spaces. But the chaplains are godly people. The chaplains' wives I've found are godly women who help mentor wives most of the time. And I was able to find a good connection there. I do think there's opportunity because there's money and there's power and there's notoriety and women and all those things. But I think if you get connected with the right people, you can circumvent it. The challenge is, if you get too big for your britches too fast, that could destroy anybody. And you see that in pop culture. You see that all over the place.
Oh, yeah. In anything, really. Yeah.
And you see, like, when the guys that are married typically tend to be more centered, than ones aren't. But, there are exceptions. I mean, I know of guys committing adultery on their wives. I've seen it happen, all the time. So, I think it's just like anything else, except more magnified. The question is, how, your faith can be magnified just as much because of the notoriety, and you have a better opportunity for influence with people just because you wear a helmet. People are like, I want to hear what you have to say. And so Twitter was a lot easier then. People were more likely to respond. And then when you become a church planner and pastor, you're sort of like, dude, get out of here. So,
yeah,
I don't have that opportunity like I did then.
Yeah. So you did about a half decade, I think I remember, in the NFL, then jumped into, was it pastoring or church planning right off the bat? How'd that come about? You felt that call back when you were 20 and you found yourself in that place. So how'd that kick off?
Yeah. So when we were in the NFL, my wife and we would join church plants almost in every city because that's what we felt drawn towards as younger church. So we'd join a church of 30 people, 40 people, like in its core team phase, help it get launched and be a part of it, lead small groups. We'd lead, we were young, so we'd lead like college groups, things like that, and just serve and say, how do we be regular attenders of churches that just gives and serves and it just participates and supports the leadership. And so we did that all along the way. And then when I got out, I went right into young adults ministry. I was doing high school and college age ministry. And then eventually we moved to Utah and Salt Lake City, and helped plant a church. I guess that was our first Acts 29 church plant experience. That's where my first experience as an elder at a church, and served there, which was awesome to do. And we had a teaching team. So we helped plant churches like very much from the jump, and was doing that all the way until we decided to plant our own church just a few years after that.
All right. And that's Doxa?
Well, Doxa is a whole nother ballgame. So we planted Bay City Church in San Francisco in 2017. And Lease Church, all the whole, everyone likes to say their context is the worst. San Francisco is where I'm from. Yeah. It's pretty bad there. I don't know if you've heard in terms of its Christian background. So I'll spare you all those details, but it was very difficult, and it was a hard place to be. And it was my hometown. So that made it challenging. When COVID hit, that sort of upset the apple cart. It was very difficult to raise children there. My wife was pregnant with our fourth kid, my third daughter. And she's like, "Oh, we gotta go." And at a certain point, I felt like if I wanted my wife to love doing ministry, I think she would have stayed. But if I want her to love doing this, I need to make sure that she feels like she's in a spot where she's comfortable. And this was the first time she'd ever said, "Hey, I need to make a move, not you." Yeah. So, and that's when Doxa Church, which is, for those of you guys that don't know, Doxa is the former Mars Hill Bellevue campus. It's now since moved to Redmond, which is where Microsoft is, just 8 minutes down the road. And so it's got a lot of history, and I've took that church over about 3 years ago now.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, something you talk about a lot in your podcast, some in your preaching, although it's not the main thing you always talk about. Definitely on your Instagram, and that you speak about quite a bit, are Christians and health. Why do you think, or why have you experienced that that's such a forgotten or kind of a secondary topic for believers?
Well, I think it's a secondary topic for believers. I think there's a dualistic approach to eating and drinking in America. It certainly has its roots in Gnosticism. Nancy Pearcey has a great book, Love Thy Body. Totally recommend it. The Person-Body Divide.
We'll have her on next season, actually, to talk about that book.
Oh, good. You need to ask her a question for me, why she did not include eating in that book. Because she does a really amazing job at talking about person, body. Like we as a culture have looked at the body as separate from the individual, the person, which is why it leads to things like euthanasia and abortion and sexual promiscuity, all these different things. Well, I think that same approach applies to eating and drinking. We think, okay, well, that's just food. And so it's not who I am. My spirituality is separate. As long as I love Jesus, I should be able to eat and drink whatever I want within reason, and what reason means is kind of up to me to decide in the very moment. I decide I want cake or pie or steak or whatever it is. So I think we've divided those two things. And so we can sort of take, the responsibility off our shoulders from having to say, that God has given us all things, and we steward our money. We know that to be true. And we steward our families, and we steward our relationships. We steward our church responsibilities if we have those. But our bodies is kind of up to us whether or not we want to steward them. And that's we kind of quote Jesus a little bit out of context, do not fear what can kill the body, but what can't kill the soul, and all these things like that. And so we say, well, that means I can eat Oreos and ding dongs and Twinkies if I'd like that.
Sure. As long as I'm reading my Bible and going to church.
Absolutely. And so we want to abdicate responsibility in that regard. And I also just think it's an American idol. It's an American cultural idol. And it's a sacred cow that we don't want to touch. And it's like, if you want to know about the water, don't ask the fish. Everybody is doing it. Everybody is participating in this. And so therefore it's probably okay. If you were to ask somebody in the Eastern culture context looking in America, one of the first things they would say is how unhealthy and overweight Americans are. We are swimming in the culture of sickness, obesity, and gluttony, to be honest, and do not see it very often. And we often dismiss and laugh at it. And that's because we most violently defend and we dismiss things that, dismiss adversarial positions against our idols. I mean, that's typically what we do. And I do think eating in particular is an American idol. And we are idolaters in that respect in many ways. So maybe that's too harsh, too fast, Jared, but I do think those are the primary reasons, is that we are defending what we most idolize and worship.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, Eddie, just about some of the things that you share regularly is that I think people expect us as pastors to talk a lot about, how you order your life after God. You should pray. You should, avoid sex outside of marriage. They're kind of used to that. Why do you think more pastors don't talk about health as much? The Bible certainly does. So why do you think pastors don't take up this topic as much?
It's a great question. It's one I've pondered. I have a lot of friends in the SBC, and I think they would tell you that it's even more an issue in the South, mainly because it's just a cultural.
Yeah,
I think pastors are
potluck.
That's right. That's right. You shouldn't be drinking alcohol, right?
That's right.
It's like, well, you shouldn't be drinking canola oil, but you're doing it, and it's like, so there's this big like disconnect there that alcoholism, because the feedback loop of alcohol is fast, and you see someone get drunk immediately, we think that's bad, but the feedback loop of a poor diet is much longer and much slower, and it results in things like chronic disease, metabolic dysfunction, chronic diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, things like that, like early onset dementia, all these different things. And so because those things are longer and slower, we can just say that's probably not the cause, even though we know it is. And so therefore, if the sort of side effects of the sin don't show themselves, then maybe it's not a big deal. And I think pastors, the reason why pastors don't talk about it much is because they're participating in it as well. So it's hard to stand up on stage with any measure of credibility if you feel like I'm also guilty of it. But it's not even that. I don't even know if there's a low grade fear about it. I think they actually just don't think about it because nobody else is. And so if you say, hey, you shouldn't be a glutton, like we did a topical series on the 7 deadly sins, which we don't do topical very much, but we did a couple years ago. And it was like the first time 95% of our church had ever heard a sermon mention the word gluttony. It feels like this old medieval word that you shouldn't talk about, but that's because we're all gluttons. And if you say it, it just feels weird. But when you say alcoholic, it has a social stigma to it. If you say drunkard, it has like a social stigma to it. If you say drug addict or porn addict, it has a social stigma. But if you say I'm a food addict, we have immediate sympathy, or maybe we're a victim of circumstances instead of, and that sometimes is the case, but instead of maybe I do have a lax attitude towards my body and towards eating that is actually going to result in an early death. And it's going to take me away from people I love. So you obviously have touched a funny bone here, Jared. I could talk all day.
No, this is what I wanted to talk about. This is what I want our men to hear from. So man, just what are practical indicators? This is something you look at and you talk with men all the time. If we're sitting down, you and me, and I'm saying like, man, I want to steward my body well, or I'm feeling this way, or I feel disconnected with God. What are some practical indicators for me as a man that I might be physically unhealthy?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think there's three.
We're not medical doctors, but we're
of course
pastors who talk to men about this all the time.
I should say that, yes, consult an actual doctor. I just play one on a podcast every now and then. So talk to a doctor, preferably talk to a functional medicine doctor. I think there are 3 kind of pillars that I try to talk to men about, for specifically for leaders, but even it applies for everybody. You want to feel good. So there's a well-being aspect. There's a longevity aspect. We want you to be around a long time. I want you to perform at a high level. And so if at any point you feel like those 3 things are in jeopardy, chronic sickness, I'm getting sick all the time, I'm constantly tired, I'm constantly, constant issues with GERD, heartburn, things that we think are normative, that we subscribe, we prescribe pills for. Any of those types of things. If you're always tired, if you're not, if you feel like I have no desire for my wife, or if it's a woman, for my husband in a romantic, intimate way. So even things like constantly anxious or depressed, it's easy to say like, I need to go to a doctor to get a pill. That may be what you need, to be sure. But there are also a number of things you could look at before we just Band-Aid it. Because in America, our healthcare system and our medicine, the way we train our doctors is very much, and I think most folks are starting to catch on to this, it's not about preventative care. It's about treating acute symptoms. So if you want to be around a long time, if you want to be healthy, there's a preventative aspect to your preventative approach to your body that you need to consider. So if you're starting to feel like you're bogged down and you've downloaded some software on your computer that is like way too advanced for your hardware, tired, losing thoughts, brain fog's a really good symptom. These are very clear and obvious things that tell you need to consider changing your diet, considering what you eat and drink, how well you're sleeping, managing your stress, all of these different things. I'm convinced, Jared, that most Americans have never felt optimal in their entire lives. They've never felt as good as they can feel, because they've been eating, Subway sandwiches and having ice cream for dessert for their entire lives and drinking alcohol. And it's like they've never known what it feels like to be an optimal human being when a few changes could change their life and give them the well-being that they seek, the longevity, the long life, and the performance. If you are in and out of the hospital for this, and that is not a normal way to live. For things that your doctor can't explain and we're not sure what it is. Maybe it's this, maybe you've got Hashimoto's, and what could it be? Those are all signs that this is absolutely diet related and potentially related to stress and sleep deprivation.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it, Eddie, is not so much because we're medically qualified, but because you have been in an organization, in a system that is about optimal human performance. So how do we tie some of this together, Pastor, scripturally? Where in the Bible are we commanded to be stewards of our bodies?
It's a great question. I think people miss a lot of what happens in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. In the beginning, God creates everything good, and he creates man to be very good. He's created everything wonderful. He creates Adam and Eve to be in community with themselves and be community with God. I think most pastors, most Christians, we study Genesis chapter 3, but we truly don't understand the weight and gravity of what Genesis chapter 3 does. We kind of start and end with, you're a sinner, you need salvation, Jesus died on the cross, resurrection from the grave on your behalf. All that is the foundation and crux, pun intended, for what we believe. There's just a little bit more going on than just that. So you have to remember the creation narrative. It's creation, fall, redemption, restoration, not just fall and redemption. So there's the creation aspect. God creates everything perfect. We mess things up with sin. It fractures not just our relationship with God, our relationship with one another, and our relationship with creation. So there's all sorts of things broken here. There's the thorns and thistles aspect to our work. And so when you think about what that means as it relates to food, well, certainly we die, but it means that as sinners and as fractured, as being disconnected from God, there's all sorts of ways we're going to get in and try to manufacture our food supply that is going to be disconnected from the way God intended us to do it. So God creates animals a specific way. We decide, well, what we should do is fatten them up a specific way for economic reasons, for weight reasons. We're going to, in order to get grains more vastly produced and vegetation, big food, big agriculture, we're going to use these different types of pesticides. We're going to shrink the wheat. We're going to shrink it a third the size by crossbreeding it. We're going to mess up what God intended us to have in order to be more economically viable and also to feed more people faster. Some of those intentions are good. Some of those are not so good. It kind of misses the point. It doesn't matter what your intentions are. It matters what the ramifications are of what doing that means. As a result, we've sort of broken all of the sort of basics, the way God made things. That's why I always tell people, try to eat food as close to the way God originally intended it as possible. So that does mean an organic grass-fed animal. It does mean you're eating organic vegetables, because those are free of the things that human beings created to make those products more economically viable. So those things are, what often contributes to our chronic disease, metabolic dysfunction, cancer, all these different things. So you have to think about it that way.
Yeah.
Even more scripturally, you have to look at, 1 Corinthians chapter 6. You have to see your body as a temple of the Holy Spirit. You have to understand that, I know we're talking about there's a sexual aspect to that as well, but there's also Absolutely. But the principle still applies. This is a gift from God that God has given you to steward. This is your physical body. Treat it with honor and respect. And if it is a temple of the Holy Spirit, the way the Israelites treated the temple in the Old Testament and approached the temple, you should approach your body in similar fashion and care for the things that God has given you. That means you're not giving them out freely in sexual relationships, but it also means you're not destroying them to the glory of God and the joy of all people because it's funny or because you want the simple pleasures. And there's also another spiritual aspect to this that people, we're looking for, as Christians, we often find ourselves looking for socially acceptable ways to mask the shame, hurt, guilt, and frustration that we have instead of giving that to Christ. So if we can't go to the bottle and we can't go to the porn, we can't go to the strip club, or we can't go to this, or this, we can go to the food because that's at this point socially acceptable. And so there's probably things we need to give over and lay at the feet of Christ that we have not done, that we are laying at the feet instead of the bowl or the bag or the plate, which is essentially, in essence, idolatry. But it's sad, and we want freedom, and those things don't provide that freedom.
What's better than a family vacation, guys? Well, how about an all-inclusive family vacation? Glory at a Family Camp is like a cruise on land. Everything's taken care of, from meals and lodging to activities, childcare. But the best part is, guys, Family Camp is a Christ-centered experience so that you and your entire family can grow closer to God and one another. Save your family's spot for this most unique, all-inclusive family vacation at glorietta.org or by clicking the link in our show notes. Man to Men listeners are involved in and leading impactful organizations across the country. So I wanted to ask you guys, is your church, ministry, or nonprofit seeking more laborers for a plentiful harvest? Imagine the transformative impact of integrating passionate young leaders into your mission, each of them eager to make a significant difference. Friend of the show and our sponsor, Reliant Mission, can assist you in creating your own financially support-based residencies, all tailored to your needs. Reliant provides world-class training and coaching for these young leaders to successfully raise their support. They also manage all the employment logistics, freeing your organization to focus on the ministry work that God has called you and your new residents to. If you're looking to expand your team and your impact by equipping and empowering young leaders, visit reliant.org/partner, that is RELIANT.org/partner, to learn how they can support your efforts. Man-to-Man listeners are men of vision. And if you're driven by a God-sized vision for ministry that's waiting to be realized, but you find yourself restrained by limited funding or the need for more dedicated time, friend of the show and sponsor Reliant Mission is ready to help you make that vision possible. Reliant equips support-based workers with the tools that they need, including expert training and coaching in fundraising. This training ensures that you can secure the funding required to dedicate yourself entirely to your God-given mission. Whether you're initiating a new project, joining an existing mission, or taking your ministry global, Reliant helps you secure the resources needed to turn your vision into reality. Visit reliant.org/partner, that's RELIANT.org/partner, to see how they can help your ministry visions come to life. College guys, is your ideal summer job a place where you can get paid, gain important skills, and make a gospel impact? If so, then working camp is your dream summer job. You could spend your summer wearing a suit and tie in a cubicle, or spend it investing in the lives of over 100,000 campers nationwide who come to one of Lifeway's camps this summer. Friend of the show and regional sponsor Lifeway offers 3 national options for serving at camp: Fuge, Student Life, and CentriKid. All will pay you, they'll train you, and they'll give you plenty of opportunities to serve the church while building critical skills and a work ethic that will serve you well in any future career. And no guarantees, guys, but you could also meet your future wife. You can get more information about the job, not your future spouse, on the links in our show notes. So please make your summer count. Consider working camp. I remember a couple times in my life where I was convicted of this. One was just a few years ago, where I realized, it was just a hard time and I had a hard day and I came home and I'm kind of looking for a respectable comfort, like you just said. It's like, and in my heart, I recognized it. This is the Holy Spirit. I was like, I don't want God right now. I want gummy bears, which is a terrible trait. But I just recognized it again by the Spirit's just still small voice within me that, wait a minute, what am I doing? And then I remember when I was in college first thinking about this idea of stewardship, because that was really the first time I started thinking about what I ate. And, I'm not like, I think I'm in shape. Like I care, I am not professional athlete status, but I started thinking about this, and I was reading, it was a John Piper book called When I Don't Desire God. And he said, and I've used this in my pastoral counseling for the last 20 years. He said, when a man comes to me and says, I don't feel like I'm really connecting with God, he said, the first thing that I'll ask him is, how are you sleeping? How are you eating? And that really began to change my paradigm into the very thing that you and I are talking about right now, which is, there's a bodily stewardship aspect to my walk with God, to this gift he's given me of my own body. So man, what are some general realistic things to consider, like sleep or like eat? We talked a bit about eating, working out, those kinds of things. What are general, probably realistic things for every man that I need to consider doing if I'm to steward my body?
That's right. That's good. I appreciate that. And yeah, it's a good point you make. It's not, no one's saying you need to be a bodybuilder. You need to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 70s or look like an Instagram model. If you're, that's not what we're talking about here. You have to get on like steroids, or that's not stewardship.
Yeah. I mean, that's body image stuff, which I think guys struggle with more. We got an episode coming up about that. But yeah, just to be a healthy man, what are some general realistic things that I can do?
That's right. Yeah. So just to manage expectations, it doesn't mean that if you steward your body well, you need to look like something or you will look like something. But I think a few general principles are this. How can you eat food as close to the way God made it as possible? Like if you're saying, I don't know where to start, you start by shopping around the outside of the grocery store. This is a principle that is tried and true, tried and tested. You're eating produce that is organic and grass-fed. If it's meat that's organic and grass-fed, produce that's organic. You're looking at things like chickens, wild-caught fish. If you're eating things like carbohydrates, you're doing things that are like organic. So you're going to have like sweet potatoes that are organic, or rice. You're just trying to eat food close to the way God intended it. So anything with like these industrial lubricants that they sell you as oils, like canola oil, anything with that in it is a man-made product that is not from God. So if you just said, what is the basic thing I can do? When you go to the grocery store, choose the vegetables and meat that are closest to what you think would have been around, 6,000, 8,000, however old you think the earth is 1,000 years ago. Okay?
Let's guess, guys.
Or millions. Yes. I don't want to divide the room here, but I'm just saying, like, do that. The second thing is think quality over quantity. We're so obsessed with calorie number. 1,600 calories, 2,000 calories, 2,500 calories. First of all, that's really difficult to live that way. The second is if you are eating it, frankenfoods as they're called, foods created in labs, like Oreos, like processed meats, like hot dogs. If you're eating those type of things, it will be more difficult for you to manage your calories because they are manufactured to induce cravings. Nabisco does not have your best interest at heart. General Mills and Kellogg, they do not have the best interest at heart. They want to make money. So when you eat foods as close to the way God made them as possible, crazily enough, I know science wouldn't say this, but God intended foods to regulate your body coalesces and becomes synchronous with the food a lot easier. So that means your hunger hormones are regulated when you eat food as close to the way God made it as possible. So think quality over quantity. That's like really, really simple. Another simple thing is most people are not physically active. 77% of people don't move more than a mile a day. We go from bed to car to desk to car to couch to bed. Move a little bit. I call it NEPA. It's nerdy, but non-exercise physical activity. Just go for a walk if you don't move around 1 to 2 miles a day. You say that's a long time. It'll take you 40 minutes to walk 2 miles briskly. You say, I don't have that time. Spread it out. Like you make time for what you value. Another basic thing would be, if you wanted to like maybe one step up, you're like, I don't know where to start, what foods are causing any problems. You can walk into any doctor and get a functional medicine doctor and get like a relatively affordable food sensitivity test. It'll tell you what foods cause problems and which foods don't. And you can just eat the ones that don't and don't eat the ones that do. Very simple. More practically speaking, and I think this is catching on. I'm very glad. If you want good sleep, avoid the Trojan horse that's in your pocket, and that's your cell phone. Get that thing out of your bedroom. That thing is destroying your sleep. Sleep is linked to all sorts of chronic diseases. It may not be the diet. It might actually be the fact that you aren't sleeping well because we've been looking at the screen. It's the blue light, but it's also the mental anguish that it causes. Those are some very basic things. And certainly there's far more you can do, but I think that's a good start.
Yeah. And I think even as we began the episode, Eddie, we talked, and I think we talked a little bit in the pregame as well, that sometimes Christians feel like to think about their bodies or to steward their bodies or to do anything for their body is some sort of weird idolization or maybe a misunderstanding of physical health. What have been some of those that you've encountered just among different Christians that we misunderstand things about physical health?
Yeah, well, again, don't fear what can kill the body, but what can't, kill the soul. And you read that and you hear that and you go, okay, so that means all that matters is my soul. You're going back to this idea of this sort of Gnosticism, this dualistic separation of soul and spirit. So that trickles in. And so all of a sudden it's like, well, whatever I want to eat, is fine. And so then I can just eat it. And as long as I love Jesus and I pray, that's okay. The other issue, I think for a lot of people is, especially in Christian circles, any amount of care about something that's not like overtly Jesus, whether that's like my job or money or my body, is sort of like this over infatuation or idolatrous thing. So we overlook stewardship. So if I really, really want to be good at my job, that means I'm an idolater because I don't love Jesus enough, right? And the same is true for your body. So that if I care too much about my body, well, then now I'm vain. So that's vain.
Yeah.
That's a common one, is that we think that if we care about eating, we're vain. And we have some sort of problem with us, that you have an eating disorder, or, you have a body image issue and you just want to become, an Instagram model or something. And it's like, no, it's like, I just want to steward my body. There's a fine line. I think most of us are far closer to bodily neglect than we are to vanity. That's just true about Americans. So of course, vanity is a problem, but that's its own issue. So what I do is I always like to say, let's set that aside. Let's agree that that's a problem, and let's deal with that problem eventually. Let's talk about bodily neglect and poor stewardship first. And those two things can be talked about separately. And that helps people go, okay, vanity is a problem. What do I need to deal with? There's two sides of the ship. We can walk off either one. But I think the vanity conversation, is interesting because, you grew up in the 90s. They have all these like MTV commercials about, bulimia and anorexia. And so you're sort of programmed, just like with the DARE thing, like don't smoke. Nobody smokes anymore. We're sort of programmed to believe that if I care about food, that I'm some sort of, I obviously have a body image issue. And that's just not true. And I think big food, I think large companies like PepsiCo and Kellogg and Nabisco, they've all really benefited from that approach. I really do.
Got it. Well, I don't know if they're going to sponsor us anytime soon here on Man to Man. So
sorry.
No, you're good, man. Hey, so what is something that's changed about the way you approach health since you were a younger man?
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think I was early on. So my mom passed away of cancer. She was, she had a lot of chronic diseases. If you think about origin story, obviously that plays a role for me. I was seeing my mom slowly diminish because of chronic disease obviously informs how I care about that. And so, I recognize that there's a challenge. Everyone has that origin story. I recognize the challenges for people to getting on board, and it obviously is easier for me. But from an early age, as an athlete, most athletes understand that food's important because they see how it more acutely affects performance. So it's easier to see the differences. So we all care. And so early on, I was very much, okay, well, how do I get content about what to eat? And so I'd go to Jim Bro websites and message boards in the late 90s and early 2000s and go, okay, eat this much protein. And so lots of protein powder and vegetables and chicken and nothing else. And does it work to get you stronger? It does for a while, but if we're talking about stewardship, that's not a good way to steward your body long term either. You just look better while also not stewarding your body.
Yeah.
So when I started to sort of uncover how eating food as close to the way God made it as possible is better for stewardship, I started to introduce things back into the way I ate, because I started to reconcile my faith with, also trying to perform at a high level. What I saw was there was a huge overlap. There was a massive overlap. So in incorporating more fats back in, saturated fat is a big thing I flipped on. It was a no-no in the 90s, right? This goes way back to Ansel Keys and the studies that he did around vilifying saturated fat and how we should now have these things like seed oils instead. Bringing those back in, grass-fed butter, coconut oil, avocados, and seeing that my performance improved, my well-being improved, my sleep improved. That was a big one. Lowering the protein content. You just don't need 250 grams of protein shakes. It's just not, it's not good for your gut.
Yeah.
It makes you huge. It's also not it's not going to necessarily perform. You're not going to necessarily perform any better. So lowering protein, welcoming back saturated fats, increasing fruits. And then, things like alcohol. So, this may surprise, I didn't drink alcohol till I was 21 years old.
Yeah.
And that was only because the girl I liked, who's now my wife, said, "Will you drink with me?" And I said, "Sure." And I was like, "Let's do it." And so that's
daughter.
I know. Can you believe it? It's totally ridiculous. But I'm not a massive drinker as it is. I may drink once or twice a year at the very most. So I'm not someone that would say that. But studying the scripture, because I was that functional Pharisee, I thought alcohol is bad always. When you study scripture, I know that my SBC friends don't agree, but I see a very clear indication that that alcohol is not only is in the Bible, but it's also a welcomed addition into someone's life, and that there are positive aspects of alcohol, and that not that you have to, but it's permissible to partake, and that it is celebratory. And seeing that is a big change for me. Not that I still do it very often, but that it is true. And the Bible's not making the case that alcohol is healthy for you. I don't think there is it is poison. It is which poison do you like the taste of best? But it is absolutely permissible. And so that's another thing I think I've flipped on over the years.
Yeah. You got any current holistic health goals? Thinking like, mind, body, soul, strength. What are your current goals?
Well, mind, body, soul, strength. I've recently ditched my smartphone. That is something that maybe doesn't feel mind, body, spirit. I think all three of those things are influenced by my device. I've sort of tried to make the decision. Do I really want to be permanently connected, omnipotent, omniscient with that device? That thing steals from me. It steals from my relationships. It steals from it tempts me to eat, to drink. If you think about it in that way, it robs me of my sleep. And at this point, the benefits are greatly outweighed by the drawbacks, in my mind, of that device. And the thing that really got me, if I'm honest with you, is I'm seeing my daughter's lives pass. And for whatever reason, the Lord's put my 7-year-old daughter on my heart. And as I get rid of that device, what I believe God's saying is every time you have an inkling to look at your phone, well, now it's gone. But even if you do, go spend that time with her, because there's no amount of time on that phone that's going to outweigh that relationship. And, maybe it's just me, but I'm not mature enough. I feel like my biology has been hijacked by that thing, and I'm not mature enough to overcome that with willpower. And so my relationships are just too valuable and too important. And I'd rather just be less available on a phone and less distracted, more bored, and more available for my family. Yeah. And so that's a massive goal for me. It's been a few months. I'm hoping it's a permanent change. And so we'll see how it goes.
Man. Yeah. That's courageous. I don't know if a lot of the guys listening would be willing to take on that challenge. So I asked you, what's a new challenge, current goal? That's a good one. Yeah. And kind of speaking to that, Eddie, this idea of heart, soul, mind, and strength, kind of the way Jesus designed us. What are some recommendations you've got for us, Pastor, on just like what's a good podcast or book kind of on any of these topics? What are you reading right now? What's fueling your soul that you'd recommend to some of the men?
Yeah. I'm sad that there's not a really great Christian resource on the body, in terms of like health and wellness. There isn't. I just don't. I've been looking for 10 years. If there is someone out there has it, please DM me on Instagram or email me or something. The closest thing I've seen is like Rick Warren wrote a book called Daniel Plan. It's really kind of just a diet book, but he wrote it with Mark Hyman and Daniel Amen. Those are two well-respected functional medicine doctors. I guess he's a neuroscientist, Daniel Amen, but very, very intelligent guys.
Yeah, that's been out a long time.
So I can't say it has, and it's old. It's it's an older book. That's just as close as you could get.
Yeah.
So I do sort of have to feel like I'm doing this sort of merging of the two things. So I would read Love Thy Body by Nancy Pearcey. If you're going to have her on, that's worth your weight in salt. You read that book and then you go read something like, Good Energy, which is a new book by Dr. Casey Means. And it's a book about the cell and why our bodies are bogged down. And then you're going to have to infer the spiritual connection between the two. I would read Good Energy by Casey Means. I would certainly read Love Thy Body by Nancy Pearcey. Yeah. For the basics, if you're looking like, how do I just like get started with, like maybe you've made the decision, I want to get healthy. Again, I don't know if there's a Christian one. I would read Dave Asprey's Bulletproof Diet. I think that book is just a very simple, clear, and easy way to understand this is how you live a long time because of what you eat. Again, you're going to have to infer the spiritual principles over that. I think those are three great resources. In terms of podcasts, and there's a lot of like Instagram Reely podcast type stuff out there. Yeah. Overwhelming. And it's like, carnivore, paleo, this and that. And it's just like, it's so overwhelming.
Everyone's feeding.
I would tell you to listen to my podcast. You can do that if you want. I would recommend Andrew Huberman's podcast, which everyone has heard of. The Huberman Lab is very intelligent. I'd recommend what's his name? Mark Hyman's podcast, a fantastic podcast on health. And you're going to have to infer a lot of the spiritual aspects to it as well.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like
those are some good resources.
Yeah. One of the main spiritual aspects that I'm picking up on in a pattern of our own conversation and even just my own health journey is really what the Spirit's going to have to give you. And that's some of the fruit of the Spirit in self-control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to need self-control for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for coming on today, man. If the guys want to connect with you, follow you, find you on the podcast, where can they connect with you?
Yeah. You can find me, my website's exnihilohealth.com. You can, just like Latin from nothing. You can find that. That's usually where our podcast lives, and a blog. If you're interested, you can also find me on Instagram or Twitter, Real E Williams. If you're interested in, some of the stuff, you have questions, man, reach out. I'd love to chat. I always do.
So good. Thanks for joining us, Pastor.
Yeah. I'm honored. Thanks, Jared.
Man to Men is powered by Beta Upsilon Chi, the nation's largest Christian fraternity, commonly referred to as Bucks. We exist to equip and empower college men to live faithfully and lead courageously. You can find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi by transliterating our Greek letters and adding a .org. That's byx.org. And if you're enjoying this audio journal, please subscribe and consider giving to our work with college men across the country by following the individual partner note or partner link in the show notes. We are produced, rather well, I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.